Top Turnbuckle Podcast. For over 2 years, the revolutionary force in podcast entertainment. The Monday Night Raw after WrestleMania continues to be one of the most exciting nights on the wrestling calendar for fans, as it is filled with surprises. It typically includes big returns and twists in the stories that exploded the night before at the Showcase of the Immortals. Now, this trend started back in 1993, following WrestleMania 9. This was also the first year for Monday Night Raw, and while that particular night was more so a genesis than a groundbreaker for shocks, returns and turns, it was still nice to have a show the night after the biggest night of the year. This series will take a look back from the very first to the most recent night after WrestleMania episode of Monday Night Raw. From the highs to the lows, to the good and the bad, we will cover it all. I'm Johnny from Top Turnbuckle Podcast. Please follow myself, James and Stu as we bring to you our over-the-top wrestling natter, chatter and outrageous tangents. April 5th, 1993. Monday Night Raw, the Manhattan Center, New York City. Now, I'd just like to point out that this show had absolutely nothing to do with the night before. The first thing about this episode is that it didn't feature a single name from any of the big matches at WrestleMania 9. When we look at the glorious moments the night after Mania's Raw would provide over the years, it is remarkable with how bad this one was. There was no Immortal Hulk Hogan, no Yokozuna, no Shawn Michaels, Tatanka, Lex Luger, Mr. Perfect, Bret Hart, Giant Gonzalez, Brutus Beefcake, Money Incorporated, The Undertaker, Crush, Doink or Razor Ramon. The only wrestlers who appeared at WrestleMania 9 who also appeared on Raw the next night were Bob Backlund and the Steiner brothers. So what did happen, you ask? Well, first up, they left that annoying Rob Bartlett at home, and he wouldn't be joining the Macho Man Randy Savage and Vince McMahon on commentary. In fact, his days were numbered, and the broadcaster was gone within the company 2 weeks later after a disastrous 4-month run. First match of the night was the Beast from the East, Bam Bam Bigelow, gaining a win over Virgil. Virgil misses a dive off the second turnbuckle and is hit with a clothesline. Bigelow goes up to the top, drills the diving headbutt, and that's it. It's 1993. Virgil really doesn't need to look competitive at all. This was the start of a solid push for Bigelow that saw him begin to headline European tours with Bret Hart shortly after. The chemistry would lead to Bigelow and Hart eventually headlining the first King of the Ring pay-per-view. Speaking of men who would later headline with Bret Hart that summer, out came Jerry the King Lawler several times throughout the night, mocking the crowd and drawing heat. King Lawler kept promising to get in the ring and fight, but would then change his mind and go to the back. Now, the only mentioning of WrestleMania 9 was a clip filmed the night before of Mr. Fuji complaining alongside Yokozuna that they got ripped off. That was literally it. Bob Backlund looks to lock up with Kimchi next. Backlund gets the win using a bridging pin. I just can't get into this babyface Bob Backlund, and neither can the rest of the crowd. Jumping Jim Brunzell versus Damien Demento. Brunzell runs into a boot to the gut and Demento hits a neck breaker and a knee drop for the win. This was dreadful. I don't even think the crowd realised that Brunzell was once part of one of the most popular tag teams in the golden era of the WWF, the Killer Bees. They simply couldn't care less. Next up, the Beverly Brothers versus the Steiner brothers. This was a rematch from the Royal Rumble from 2 months previous. Scott hits a Frankensteiner on Blake and we have our winners. A pretty good tag team match here, good chemistry between the two teams. Now for the main event, Jerry the King Lawler versus Jim Powers. Powers puts his head down, is caught, and Lawler hits a pile driver, which he tells Savage to watch. Pulls the tights and gets the win. Lawler gets in the face of Savage at ringside, and that's it. The night after Mania is known for returns of legends and debuting superstars, but this one featured the returns of Jim Powers and Jumping Jim Brunzell. Not exactly the night after Mania Raw we would grow to love and look forward to over the many years that followed. There were no debuts, and if you consider the return of Jim Powers and Jumping Jim Brunzell to be noteworthy, then more power to you, as they both lost. In the end, I guess they had to start somewhere.
And hilarious tangents.
Let's not tangent off. No Samoan spikes.
That's it.
Fucking tangents!
Then look no further. Join your hosts James, Stu and Johnny and subscribe to Top Turnbuckle Podcast.